Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. Doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about developing a value system that separates the untrue from the true. Listen as we explain the pitfalls of accepting finite good and mistaking the false for the real. In this show, we will explore the benefits of accepting spiritual identity as the only reality. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and rest in the knowledge of the divine creation. So my title of today's show is Sitting at the Right Hand of Truth. What exactly does that mean for us?
Yeah, more detrimental than evil, sickness, suffering, lack, limitation is finite good. What Mary Baker Eddy calls the pleasures of sin, or the wolf in sheep's clothing. The idea of human satisfaction. To build the mental landscape which supports the divine principle, begin by knowing the nature of the divine as absolute harmony without opposite. We have something here from Mary Baker Eddy to set the table. Science and Health, page 241, with the marginal heading, Doom of Sin. And I'll read it. Sensual treasures are laid up where moth and rust doth corrupt. Mortality is their doom. Sin breaks in upon them and carries off their fleeting joys. The sensualist's affections are as imaginary, whimsical, and unreal as his pleasures. Falsehood, evil, hypocrisy, malice, hate, revenge, and so forth steal away the treasures of truth. Stripped of its coverings, what a mocking spectacle is sin. End of quote. Sin here means missing the mark and doesn't just mean bad behavior. The entire mental material world of energy is the sin because it's dualistic, in half and not whole, making finite good the major obstruction, coupled with a belief in mortality. We have the classic belief system, which is blind to divine truth. So where can we turn? Orthodox religion can't give you the God experience because they haven't found the God experience. They're using the mind which creates the veil. Medical science can't give you the God experience because they're busy trying to figure out how the unreal became real with the same mortal mind which can't bring forth the divine principle. So this idea of to sit at the right hand of truth, to know the truth, life is perfect, whole, complete, and to rest in the knowledge and trust the divine creation is what we're talking about today.
So you had mentioned earlier that we have to build this mental landscape to support the divine principles. So you're saying the mind we're in now, we cannot invite divine presence into our consciousness. So how do we go about building this mental landscape?
Well, what Mary Baker Eddy called educating thought up to spiritual apprehension. She writes on page 349, Science and Health with Key to the Scripture, and I'll read it. Speaking of the things of spirit, while dwelling on a material plane, material terms must be generally employed. Mortal thought does not at once catch the higher meaning, and can do so only as thought is educated up to spiritual apprehension. To a certain extent, this is equally true of all learning, even that which is wholly material. End of quote. And as far as the how-to, I'm going to go back to page 241, Science and Health, with the marginal heading, Spirit Transforms. And I'll read it. The Bible teaches transformation of the body by the renewal of spirit. Take away the spiritual signification of Scripture, and that compilation can do no more for mortals than can moonbeams to melt a river of ice. The era of the ages is preaching without practice. End of quote. So this concept of how to transform. Begin by understanding the term trans, go through, and then form, material, mental, appearance, physical. The process in development begins with the separation of identity from the mental material sense of self and the rebirth of identity in the omnipresent divine self.
So, Swami, you just told us that Mary Baker Eddy said transformation of the body by the renewal of spirit. What does that look like when it's happening? And better yet, how do we do it?
Yeah, for me, to understand this correctly, you have to understand what Jesus said, to be born again of spirit. I think that's exactly what she's talking about here, renewal of spirit. It is coming back into conscious awareness of the divine creation. We're not making things spiritual. Spirit is the only thing that is here. We don't recognize it. We don't have the faculty to be conscious of it. And so we have to, like the Bible says, repent, think differently. We have to find a different way to approach our lives other than using the five corporeal sense mind that can't bring forth the divine image. And to be born again of spirit isn't just words in a book. You literally have to purify the mind-body complex and then internalize the invisible, intangible, omnipresent spirit as your new symbol for validation. This idea of temptation. I love what C.S. Lewis said in Screwtape Letters. The devil can tempt. The enemy, which is the divine principle, can't tempt because we're born with a physical body that comes in with a pattern. We look for food, mother, and approval for validation, and like attracts like. And if we don't make this change on these different levels, even though we can say the mental material world of energy isn't real, doesn't mean that it doesn't have a certain degree of reality to it. The idea only reason walks through the open door of revelation. We must master the mind-body complex. You don't just dismiss it. You can't just kill the personal sense of self. And if you did, then you would miss the complete message of the Christ, which is found in oneself, not no self. You can't divide by zero. And so transforming, rebirthing the body in a different source of sustenance becomes the way of knowing the truth, getting everything on board so that when you can actually love the omnipresent divine spirit, which is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense, with your heart, your soul, your mind, and all your heart, then you can walk reason through the open door of revelation. Like Jesus said, I am the door. Whoever comes up to the sheepfold in some other way is a thief and a robber. if you think you can drag a personal sense of self into the kingdom of heaven, then you're not sitting at the right hand of the Father. You haven't educated your thought up to spiritual apprehension. You don't have a value system that will support the divine principle of one being, one life.
And Swami, you've been saying for years, you had this saying about training the body and training the mind to serve spirit. Can you go over that with us and then explain further?
Yeah, see, the idea of you train the mind to serve spirit and you train the body to receive that image as your symbol for validation. And if you don't do this internal work, if you don't understand what the books are saying, then, like Mary Baker Eddy says here, the era of the ages is preaching without practice. Talk doesn't cook the rice. The idea of preaching the gospel according to the message of the Christ is to demonstrate the omnipresence of the divine creative principle. The divine creation is everywhere, always functioning, but we must be conscious of it in order to demonstrate it in our experience. Consciousness is experience. You can't sit at the right hand of truth. You can't sit at the right side of the Father if you do not know the divine principle correctly. And if you think the divine principle is a mix of good and evil, you don't have a principle, and then you cannot demonstrate the divine law with any kind of certainty.
We have to change how we think about things that are happening in our environment. So it's just as detrimental to believe that something is good as it is bad. Is that correct?
Well, yes, thinking that it's good and thinking that it's bad, because thinking is dualistic. We have to make the line of demarcation not between good and bad, which is kind of what religion did for humanity. We have to go between what is unreal and what is real, and then recognizing that the mental material world of energy, the entire thing is unreal because it's dualistic. It's not whole. God did not make something that is temporary. This idea of like attracts like. An eternal principle can only bring forth an eternal principle. This is what makes Christian science a science, because it is provable, demonstrable. And finite good isn't divine truth. And when you think it is, then you are in ignorance of the divine truth. And like Mary Baker Eddy says, if you're not demonstrating this divine principle, then you can't be conscious of it. That's one of the things that we have really included in our work, this idea of when you're doing a physical posture. You can use your physical body, but perfect posture does not necessarily mean you are conscious of the divine creation. But you can't be conscious of the divine creation and not have perfect health.
Swami, I think a lot of people are still under that belief God is navigating their life for them and doing things for us. So I think we have to also get over that type of thinking as well. God is not creating things for us in this material world. Am I understanding that to be correct?
Yeah, exactly. You have to understand God did not create the mental material world of energy. You also have to understand God is running a perfect universe. Each and every one of us is the reflection of an indestructible principle. But if you are not willing to give up the belief in the false sense of self, then you do not create the opportunity to reveal this truth. Life is perfect. There's only one life. And if this divine principle is all, who are you? Who am I? But until we are proving that, And demonstrating the omnipresence of the divine principle, you have to understand we are out of the Father's house. We can't be conscious of it. We're still thinking about it. And then what are the steps that we can take in order to evoke this God experience?
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, you had said earlier, development begins with a separation of identity from the mental material sense of self. And you had said right before the break, there are steps that are involved in order for us to do that. So get us started. What should we do?
Well, again, it comes back to this idea of yoga means union with the divine, this rebirthing of the body in the invisible, intangible, omnipresent divine principle. If you don't have a plan to do this, and you're waiting for this to happen to you, chances are it will never happen. The idea of religion, this idea of relinking, in earlier times they had rituals, ceremonies, ordeals, ascetic practices that accompanied points of passage with these rites of passage. Today we're approaching our lives with none of this information. And so I would suggest you get yourself a tried and true metaphysical system that has all of the components that you're going to need, because Kriya Yoga is a path of action. It's a path of knowledge. It's a path of devotion. And if you understand what you're trying to do, this idea of rebirthing your body in a different source of sustenance, and you want to experience the physics of spirituality, this like attracts like. Whether you get this from Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or the Muslim religion, wherever you get it, if you're not demonstrating it, if you're not applying rules and getting results, then you have to challenge what it is that you're doing. Because if you do not know the divine principle and you do not know it correctly, then you can't prove the omnipresence of the divine creation. So where do you begin? Skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of food, skillful use of exercise. These are all fundamental things we can start to employ, because bad habits set up limitations no matter what it is that you're doing. And living is the exact same thing. We don't think right. We don't understand the difference between thinking and knowing. We don't understand meditation, or what Mary Baker Eddy called prayer, this communion with the divine. And when you mistake the false for the real, then you're in the trap. And unless you're proving the omnipresence of the divine principle, the truth of being, the perfection of being, you have to admit you don't know the truth.
So, Swami, explain to us how important it is to also have some kind of a value system.
Well, you don't just want some kind of a value system. You want a value system that is in accordance with universal order. You want a value system that separates the untrue from the true. Begin by understanding the divine nature as spiritual, perfect, whole, changeless. Begin to evaluate persons, places, and things appearing in the corporeal senses to recognize the absence of the divine qualities. This raises consciousness from the level of duality into the absolute, no longer judging by appearances based on the belief in good and bad, but making the cut at mental material and accepting only spirit as true. And this is how you would break the hypnotism of the world mind, this belief in two powers.
So, Swami, what does it look like when we love spirit?
First thing we have to understand is we can't love spirit and long for anything visible and tangible or invisible and tangible, matter or mortal mind. To sit at the right hand of truth, one must know truth, which means the difference between mental material belief in truth and the divine omnipresence. The difference between thinking with the corporeal sense mind and knowing with the 7 spiritual senses. Personal sense versus divine purpose, ego or fulfillment, are ways to separate the wheat from the tares, the unreal from the real, the temporary from the permanent. And this is all part of creating a value system that will support the divine principle.
We have a soundbite here from Herb Fitch, Realization of Oneness, Class 25A. We should play now for our listeners.
Yeah, and if anybody's interested in the full audio file or the complete program, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
We're being lifted out of the human mind, dependence on the human mind, dependence on human authorities with human mind, to our own Christ mind, which receives the bread of life, power, the wisdom, the truth, the love, the infinity of God. Our Christ mind is the heir to all that God has. And the Christ itself is turning us to that Christ mind. Now it's saying, have ye that mind, which I am demonstrating on this earth as being independent of all form, independent of death, independent of body, independent of human circumstance, independent of matter, independent of time and space. There is such a mind. It is your mind. Have ye that mind? And to get to know it, to live in it, look at all things and separate them, the sheep from the goats, the truth from the untrue, the wheat from the chaff. Respond only to truth. To that which is untrue, pay no mind. Respond not. It has no power because it is not there. Untruth has no power. All power is in truth. And when you have trained yourself to respond only to truth, you discover the non-power of untruth, the non-power of disease, the non-power of pain, the non-power of suffering, the non-power of lack, the non-power of limitation. And that non-power means that because abundance is present, that which presents lack cannot present a real lack. There is no real lack. There is no power on earth to create a real lack. There is no power on earth to move away abundance. It is present, and that is the truth. That is the meaning of non-power. Abundance is present. That is truth. God is present, and God is abundance. Therefore, lack of abundance is impossible. You simply have no capacity to see the abundance in the human mind, or to experience the abundance, or to be an instrument through which the abundance appears in the human mind. But in the Christ mind, the abundance is made visible as loaves and fishes coming from the sky, gold in a fish's mouth, a raven feeding Elijah. That which is the need fulfilled is the evidence that abundance is always present, that the grace of the Father is always our sufficiency, without exception, in all things. But if we think that there is a power to remove that abundance, we're not in truth. That is the law. In all things my grace is thy sufficiency. There is no power to remove the sufficiency. Then why don't we experience it? We're in the wrong mind. We're in the mind which cannot receive the sufficiency. It has no capacity to see the fine print, no capacity through which spirit can flow, because it's a mind made of a physical brain, of physical senses. Spirit does not flow through physicality. The Christ mind is not made of a physical brain and physical senses. It is the mind of spirit, and the Spirit of God flows through the Christ mind, and the sufficiency appears as the need fulfilled. Non-power means that whatever denies the presence of that sufficiency is a lie and has no capacity to remove that sufficiency. You can be in dire poverty and that sufficiency is there. You can be in dire famine and the sufficiency is there. There is no power to remove it, but you cannot experience it until you know the truth that it is there, and then rest in the knowledge that because it is here, that which says it is not here, it is not here. You have differentiated between the wheat and the tare. You have isolated the truth. Sufficiency is here. Food is here. That which I need is here. The rent is here. The harmony is here. The beauty is here. The peace is here. The truth is here. The perfection in all of my being is here. I'm not fooled into being this temporary mortal self. You're lifted back up into your only and eternal self. And your eternal self is here, even though the world mind echoed through the human mind makes you appear as if you're not eternal being. You cannot remove your eternal self, and the knowledge that your eternal self is here reveals that there is no power to remove it. We must know there is no power to remove the presence of God. It's just a matter of being in that mind, which is willing to be trained until you release the creature mind. In our meditation, before we have a short recess, let us take the subject which is true, that God is my sufficiency in all things, and see that this truth never changes. There are two minds that look at it. The mind which is not mind and cannot see this truth and comprehend it, and that developed state of mind called Christ mind, which is automatically in this one divine Father. It is the very mind of the Father, and it is ever fulfilling itself effortlessly through grace. One mind knows only the power of grace, the power of the Father, and the other mind thinks there are other powers. And by these so-called other powers, it is hypnotized into the belief that there is a power that can keep grace away, push it aside.
Until we are literally born of spirit and desire the invisible, intangible omnipresence, we are under the influence of the belief in good and bad, hypnotized by the appearances of the world mind, and unconscious to the divine creation. We are susceptible to the temptations of the world, but when we are in spiritual identity, no longer controlled by the appearances because we are anchored in the truth, sitting at the right hand, purified human consciousness waiting for the Christ to be called out, coming back to the mental landscape and a value system to support divine truth. Understand there is only one being, principle, and idea. The divine principle runs on the power of absolute love, life, and truth. Omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent.
That completes the show for today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there that you can press that will further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and rest in the knowledge of the divine creation. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to the program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.